Three, two.
Hello, everybody. Good afternoon, and welcome once again to our weekly media briefing and public health update with Montgomery County Executive Marc Elrich. I'm Lorna Virgili, Hispanic Public Information Officer, and joining us today is Health Officer Dr. Keisha Davis, Dr. James Bridgers, who is the Director of the Department of Health and Human Services, Mr. Sean O'Donnell, Program Administrator, Public Health, Emergency Preparedness and Response, also for the Department of Health and Human Services, and Dr. Earl Stoddard, who's Assistant Chief Administrative Officer. Our special guest today is Officer Jamie Derbyshire with the Montgomery County Police Department. Mr. County Executive, good afternoon to you. Welcome, everybody. Let's get started.
Okay, well, welcome everyone, and thank you for joining me again this week. In a matter of days, the state law pertaining to cannabis use will be changing. Today, I wanted to talk to you about how, and my administration is anticipating this and what the impact will be on Montgomery County. This change in our law is something that we want everyone to be aware of and take seriously. The legalization of cannabis does not mean that it's going to be treated exactly the same as alcohol or cigarettes. You aren't going to be able to go into a bar or restaurant and be able to order a joint. It isn't going to be similar to tobacco. You can't walk down a street and smoke cannabis as you do with a cigarette. The rules around cannabis are specific and nuanced, and it's going to take an effort for everyone to understand the parameters with this. We, in coordination with the Maryland Cannabis Administration, are embarking on a comprehensive public education campaign that will continue for the next several months. Even though the sale and use of marijuana will be legal for adults over 21, there are still laws in place restricting things like smoking in public, driving under the influence, and the quantities of marijuana that you can possess are limited. We're still awaiting details of some of the new regulations from the state about the distribution process moving forward, the awarding of licenses to distribute, and how we can regulate on-site consumption licenses. However, starting on Saturday, medicinal marijuana dispensaries that have sought and received approval from the state will be the first places selling marijuana recreationally. I've supported the legalization of marijuana for decades. Prohibition of marijuana has led to racial disparities in our justice system, with Black people more than 3.5 times more likely to get locked up because of marijuana than white people, even though usage rates may always have been the same. And this is especially concerning because getting a jail sentence is like getting a guarantee of your unemployability and possibly not being able to get college loans or get admitted to a college. The idea that we've handicapped a large portion of the population with the threat of long-term unemployment and difficult getting jobs, all because they puffed on a cigarette of marijuana, is not something that's been good for society. And I'm very glad this kind of nightmarish story is coming to an end. And if you ever want to understand where this came from, read the dialogue between John Ehrlichman and Nixon about their view of using this actually to drive down the Black community. This was a racist approach to this in the first place. And it's a real problem, and it's been a real problem now for more than 50 years. When I was younger, I knew that when white teens were caught with marijuana by teachers or even police, the most typical thing that happened is they might confiscate it. Sometimes they dumped it into a trash can in front of your eyes, or they dumped it on the ground and then they grind it into the dirt with their shoes. But no one I knew was ever arrested for possession, and it never went on anybody's record that I knew. However, I was all too aware that Black teens were often treated very differently if they were caught. This inequity in law enforcement has existed for over 50 years, still out there today. So there's a little chart up there you can read that gives you kind of the uses, how much is legal, where to consume, and what the rules are. And we're going to be making this a centerpiece over the next few months so people know what it is. We anticipate there are going to be circumstances when marijuana use could lead to some complaints about neighbors or people smoking in public. First, who should you call to complain about the smell of cannabis? If you rent, you should contact your landlord, then the Department of Housing and Community Affairs. Homeowners who have complaints about the smell of marijuana from neighbors should go directly to DHCA. You can reach them via 311, and they can also walk you through the process. Tenants should first contact their landlord if they have concerns. We don't want residents calling 911. 911 should only be used for emergencies. So we don't want 911 flooded with calls about smoking cannabis. This is a residential issue with building management, homeowners associations, or civil courts playing a role, not a police matter. Want to be clear, even though adults have the right to use marijuana, that doesn't give you the right to expose others to it, especially children. This is not different than the approach we've taken with cigarette smoking. I oppose allowing marijuana dispensaries to advertise their products, prices, or the effects of their products. We have to prevent predatory advertising aimed at children. We don't want to go down the road of alcohol and tobacco marketing, where large companies prioritize profits over the health of our communities, making use of those products seem glamorous, exotic, or sexy. This is a drug at the end of the day, just like cigarettes and alcohol, and glamorizing it is not something we should be doing. So I'm hoping that we're able to put some sensible regulations on the advertising. I've seen examples of this on the West Coast. It may be legal, but it is not good, and it encourages people to look at this in an exotic way, which is not a way to approach any drug. Beginning Saturday, cannabis use will be legal, but it should be used legally, responsibly, and within the possession limits established by state law. We're not treating this as a free-for-all in Montgomery County. I assure you of that. Today, I'm joined by Officer Jamie Derbyshire with Montgomery County Police Department. Officer Derbyshire is the department's cannabis expert and viewed as a national expert on legalization and impaired driving. And she's been helping MCPD prepare for this change to state law for some time. So I'm going to invite our guest on now to talk.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate the invitation, and it's an honor to be here. To give a little bit of background as far as what I do for the police department is I do a lot with regard to cannabis. Obviously, I am actually assigned to the traffic division, so a lot of what I do is traffic focused. But I'm also responsible for a lot of our training efforts with regard to cannabis ingestion, cannabis impairment, and to better help officers recognize these changing laws and the legislation, and also to recognize them with regard to how they affect one's ability to operate a motor vehicle safely. With that, as many know, there's been a lot of changes recently. It's very different than when I came on 20 years ago with regard to cannabis and the laws that we enforce as it relates to cannabis, all the way from possession to impaired driving. A lot has changed in these past few years, but not even so much that. Even within the cannabis community, there's a lot of changes, such as ingestion and with the product alone. And so those are all things that we really need to make certain that we consider with these new laws and the legalization coming forward on July 1st. Some of the things that I think that are important to recognize, and one of the things that we're focusing on as a police department, obviously with the traffic division and Vision Zero, and our push to make certain that our roadways are safe, is making certain that our officers are aware as to what the laws are with regard to impairment and impaired driving. And I think that that's one thing that a lot of citizens and people need to know, is that there is a possibility to be arrested for impaired driving as it relates to driving under the influence of cannabis. I think that's a common misconception, that people don't understand that yes, there are alcohol related impaired driving offenses that you can be arrested and charged with, but there are also ones that pertain to drugs, cannabis being one of those. So I think our responsibility as a department is we're realizing that the laws are changing and that legalization is happening, that people will be consuming, but we need to definitely promote safe consumption and safe roadways as well. Some of the things that I think we need to focus on were well pointed out by Colorado, who has a lot of experience with regard to this legalization on a recreational or an adult use level, is they have seen an increase in their traffic fatalities as a result of legalization. Fairly substantial increase with regard to that. So it's something that we need to be aware of, that officers need to be aware of, and the general public needs to be aware of, and especially the cannabis community as well. We really need to get that idea about perception of risk out there, that there is a risk if you're driving high, that you could potentially be involved in a crash of some sort, whether it be a serious injury crash or one just a property damage crash nonetheless. Another thing that Colorado has noticed is an increase in use, which makes sense with legal access and increased accessibility of the product, that there will be an increase in use amongst our community. Public health as well is another thing that they pointed out. Exposures to cannabis, how to protect our children, and Maryland has done a fairly good job with regard to putting that in the regulations as far as their intent on packaging and responsibility of adults to keep these products away from those that are more vulnerable, like our children. Also, the black market is always a concern and will be too with regard to adult use. There is a tax on the recreational cannabis that will be sold. And so, of course, as law enforcement and as a community, we should definitely be concerned about, the implications that'll have on the black market and obviously sales that are taking place illegally. In general, that's a very brief overview. That chart that the county exec put up is very helpful and very accurate with regard to possession amounts, how much people are allowed to possess for a personal use level as well as a civil use level. So that chart is a great resource. As far as how many plants they're allowed to grow, there are definite restrictions on that. There's 2 plants per resident, so not per person, but per residence. And there are rules as far as how or where those plants are to be out of public view and secured as well. There are also, I believe in that chart as well, civil use amounts that are pointed out as well. So where they're, as far as how much the person is possessing, if it's greater than 1.5 ounces, but less than 2.5 ounces, it's a civil use amount, but because of that, you'd only be assessed a fine with regard to that. So a lot's changing. We're going to see a lot, and it will be a little bit learn as we go. But again, we just want to make certain that we're promoting, if people do make the choice to use, that we're promoting responsible usage. As far as Montgomery County Police goes, our commanders are well aware and have made certain that their patrol officers are aware as to where the dispensaries are, so that we can look out for them and we can look out for our community members. And have also made certain that we try to get that message out there with regard to impaired driving, making certain that people are consuming safely and responsibly and not endangering life on our roadways by driving potentially impaired. So thank you again for the opportunity to speak. And that's about all I have. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Officer. Members of the media, please raise your hand on the chat if you have questions for, I see Kate Ryan already, for the county executive and or Officer Derbyshire regarding marijuana legalization and the county's efforts. So Kate Ryan, WTOP, you're first. Go ahead. Good afternoon, Kate.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Good afternoon, everyone. My question is for Jamie Derbyshire in terms of enforcement. And I believe there's a new law that also says, for example, odor of marijuana alone cannot be used for a traffic stop. How, if you suspect impaired driving, how is that done now?
Thank you for your question, and it's a good one. As far as that new legislation goes with regard to odor of marijuana, yes, we can't use it for the reason for the stop, but generally speaking, with a lot of the individuals who are impaired to the ability where they're unable to operate a motor vehicle safely, there are a lot of other indicators that we observe prior to that. So really what we're looking for impaired driving is the totality of the circumstance. So we will probably most likely observe some other driving behavior that would indicate impairment prior to even seeing anything or smelling anything with regard to, consumption at the time. So that's really, we're looking for that totality of circumstances. So really we have a lot prior to even getting to that point where we may stop the vehicle and encounter that odor or smell that odor of cannabis. And then we go from there. We actually have on our department, we have approximately 20 what we call drug recognition experts. And so those are highly trained officers that have gone through a program accredited by the International Association of Chiefs of Police. It's a nationwide program. It's actually in Canada as well. That helps to identify certain categories of drugs that someone may be under the influence of while driving. And so we have a number of these officers on the department. So once that traffic stop takes place, if someone is determined to be impaired, we would actually go further and call in a drug recognition expert and they would do a 12-step standardized and systematic process in order to determine what category of drugs that person's under the influence of.
You sort of anticipated my follow-up there. What is the field sobriety test like? And how are you guys having to brace for, I expect this would be contested.
So the field sobriety test is the same. Our first assumption with regard to potential impairment is always alcohol. That's the way that we're trained, is to rule out alcohol first. So all of our drug recognition expert evaluations take place with ruling out alcohol first. That's our first step in the process, is to determine someone's blood alcohol content. So usually through a breath test in order to do that. At that point, there's a lot of psychophysical tests that we do. We also do some clinical indicators where we look at pulse rate, we look at eye tracking and pupil size. At the end of the process, we do ask for a submission of a toxicology sample so that that's confirmed through the hospital or through our state lab for blood work.
Got it. I'll stop there. I'm sure a lot of folks have a lot more questions as well. I might look for a follow-up later, though. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Kate. Tom Fitzgerald, Fox 5 DC. Good afternoon, Tom. You have questions?
Yeah, hi. Thanks for doing the briefing. County Executive, I wanted to ask you, as we approach July 1st, obviously this is going to be a legal recreational market. Do you have thoughts, and I know the state pretty much will determine the regulations on all of this, but do you have thoughts in the county into whether or not advertising of this product should be allowed?
Yeah, I don't think it should be allowed. I mean, you should be able to have an ad saying, I'm a dispensary, but you shouldn't be able to do price. And you sure shouldn't be able to say, this pot will make you more stoned than anything you've ever had before. We've got the best weed, and all that nonsense doesn't need to be there. People want to smoke pot, we'll figure out where the dispensaries are. But this kind of glamorization, and this is what I meant in my earlier comments, it's really disturbing that with both tobacco and alcohol, we took things that are potentially dangerous, and then we let people glamorize them for the sole purpose of driving people to become customers of these things. So we shouldn't make this mistake again. If there's a way to treat this in a sobering way, we should be responsible about this. We should encourage responsibility. We should not make it look like this is the hottest, best thing to do, and it's going to make you more attractive if you do it.
Along those lines, I mean, would you introduce legislation along those lines specific to Montgomery County?
If we have the ability to, yes, I will.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Members of the media, any more questions? Oh, there is Kate Ryan again. Go ahead, Kate, follow up.
Thank you. Yes, I wanted to ask the health officer about, the county executive mentioned glamorization. I've seen some people contend that pot has absolutely no detrimental effects, that it's actually good for you, healthy for you. Now, I think we're all aware of medicinal marijuana and some of the benefits there, but do you have concerns about how it may be marketed?
Sure, Kate, thank you for the question. So legal does not equal healthy. And I think that's a really good distinction that you brought up. So we do know that while there are a few health benefits that come with medical marijuana in some specific cases, on the whole, there are also a lot of health risks that come with it. So we know that for the developing mind, especially adolescents and young adults, that there can be challenges there. And for all folks in terms of increased risk for anxiety, depression, exacerbating mental illness. We know it can cause and exacerbate lung problems in folks who may be smoking. That particulate matter, that putting that directly in the lungs is certainly challenging. For lungs can lead to a chronic cough, chronic bronchitis, and other issues. We know that for a developing fetus, we do not want our pregnant women to be smoking marijuana or getting marijuana from other means. We know that that can have detrimental effects to the baby. We know that it impairs reaction time and coordination, which again speaks to why we don't want people to be driving under the influence of cannabis and marijuana. because there are certainly effects that are related to that, and we know that there are accidents that are related to that, and so we do worry about those concerns. I would also say we want to really make sure that we are keeping our kids safe. As the county executive said, we don't want this to be glamorized. We don't want kids to be looking at this as something that they should be wanting to do. We also want folks to be really safe around in terms of where they put it, especially if they might be consuming gummies or other things that look like candy. Those need to be out of the sight of children in special containers. We don't want our children to be ingesting marijuana because they thought that it was candy. And one other key message I will just say here is the marijuana that folks are buying in dispensaries, this is not the same that you saw in the 60s and 70s. And so encourage people to go slow and start low. So if now that things are legal, people might want to say, oh, I'm going to try marijuana again. I haven't tried it for a number of years. It is potent. So don't just pick up where you left off, really going slow, starting low. We want folks to be cautious at all ages in the spectrum.
Appreciate that. And for everyone here, for police and for the county executive, are there new county employee policies that have to be instituted around this? Are there concerns about people off hours? Is there any change there in employee relations or HR on this?
So I can speak to that, Kate. So we've been, as part of our, we've had a cannabis legalization task force in the county since actually, the first meeting we had was the day before the referendum for where voters voted in favor of it. So we knew that we expected this was coming, and we've been meeting on a regular basis since then. And one of the areas we've been focused on is on HR policies. And we had a lot of commentary into the state legal process about HR related, and that actually evolved over time. And so we are largely at this point reiterating the current workforce policies, which is really the impaired, you cannot come to work impaired, educating our supervisors and employees about what that looks like in terms of coming to work impaired. Just because it's legal now doesn't mean it really changes. We've had some employees in the past who have consumed when it was not legal. And obviously we've had to deal with it through the impairment process there. The other thing we've also had to remind people is, particularly for the CDL license holders, the federal requirement on CDL licenses has not changed because the federal stance on cannabis consumption has not changed. And therefore, there's still a strict prohibition if you're a CDL license holder that you can consume cannabis and maintain your license. And so that obviously impacts many of the, those who drive I think alcohol beverage services or bus drivers, things along those lines, that still affects them. And so we are sending notices out both to managers to remind them of the policies, procedures, and training associated with impairment of employees. We're also sending out a notice to employees before around the 1st to remind them of this is what the state, just like we're doing today, just what state law says and what obviously what we're concerned about with impaired work operating.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Kate. I see Mariam Shahzad from Montgomery Community Media has a question. Good afternoon, Mariam.
Good afternoon. Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to ask, do you have just a number of how many dispensaries are going to be able to sell recreationally as of Saturday? Or, do you have a percentage out of the ones that already exist?
I don't know that I have the full data. I think we've asked, I think we've had people out reaching out to figure out who exactly, because it was not an automatic conversion, which I think is what you're recognizing. It was not an automatic conversion of medical licensure to recreational licensure. You actually had to affirmatively recognize as a medical provider that you were going to start selling recreationally. But I don't know that we have a total today of how many did that. Our understanding so far is that the majority did, more than the majority did, but I don't have a total firm number on that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mariam. Members of the media, any other questions regarding this particular topic, marijuana legalization in the state of Maryland? Raise your hand, use the chat, use this here, the platform, not the chat. All right, seems like we don't have any more questions on this topic. Thank you so much, officer, for joining us today. You can remain here just in case any Other questions might surface, but if you need to go, you're welcome to do so. Mr. County Executive, let's proceed with the other topics and
Thank you,
public health
Officer.
update.
Thank you, Officer Derbyshire. That was really helpful. And
Absolutely.
we'll continue to keep people apprised. There are a lot of good questions people asked, and what we haven't dealt with yet, we will be dealing with. So stay tuned. Okay, next in line. This week brought a compromise from the County Council on rent stabilization measures. There were two competing measures introduced at the same time earlier this year. I will support the amended bill that came out of committee on Monday. Providing renters legal protections against rent gouging is urgently needed as we continue to see ample evidence of rent increases throughout the county that are frankly exorbitant. We have seen rent increases of 50% or more. This has no bearing on anybody's cost increases. This is something very different. So the compromise would limit rent hikes to the CPI, Consumer Price Index, plus 3%, capped at 6%. I want to point out that Montgomery County has had voluntary rent guidelines for 4 decades at least. The guidelines in 40 years have not been over 6%, but I think 2 times. And the guidelines have largely tracked with inflation, and most rent increases have tracked with inflation. So the idea that landlords need some exorbitant guarantee of a rent increase is pretty unreasonable. This bill has, I think, 2 safety valves that are worth it for the public to understand, so they understand that this is not a hard fixed cap under all circumstances. If a landlord can demonstrate, and there's no reason why they can't demonstrate it, they do it on their tax returns, that their costs exceed the inflation rate, then they can get an increase to accommodate costs that exceed inflation. If landlords are doing capital improvements, which is outside of rent stabilization and outside of, the core of what this bill is about, they will get increases that allow them to cover the cost of the improvements they're making to their buildings. So this in no way prevents landlords from recovering costs that exceed inflation, and it does not prevent landlords from getting rent increases to accommodate the increased cost of necessary capital improvements on building. Rent prices have continued to rise in the Washington area. They rose 5.8% from a year ago, while overinflation for a comparable time period was 3.1%. The bill that passed gives a comfortable margin for property owners to keep up with maintenance, make needed repairs, and get a return on their investment, while also addressing rent gouging. I encourage the council to finalize this legislation and pass it as soon as possible. Too many renters are counting on us to help them stay in their homes, and we should not delay this any longer. I also want to add, there's a lot that's been made of the story of our purchasing Westchester West, and that was a really important thing we did. And it did forestall what would have been larger rent increases. But the county has no way, the resources to buy every property in Montgomery County to protect the tenants in Montgomery County. So while it's a good example of something we can do when the opportunity presents itself, most of the buildings where we're seeing large rent increases are not buildings that are up for sale. And even if they all were up for sale, the county doesn't have the resources to solve the problem that way. So absent a solution of being able to buy all the property, this is the best way to make sure that people are safe and can continue to stay where they live. The start of July will also bring higher pay for many people here in Montgomery County. And I was proud to lead the 2 fights on the council to raise the minimum wage. And it's great to see it going into action, including annual adjustments for inflation. Starting on the first of this month, large employers with the staff of at least 51 people will find that minimum wage increases to $16.70 an hour. Mid-sized employers with a staff of between 10 and 50 people will be required to pay $15 an hour for the first time, and smaller companies will have to raise pay to $14.50 for an hour on July 1st. The minimum wage for those workers will remain at that level until the standards passed by the General Assembly raised the state minimum to $15 in January. So effectively, that this is just this is a move to $14.50, but it will be $15 in January when the state law takes effect. Many businesses have already moved beyond this point. Competition for labor and has just already raised wages. We know some major companies who for a long time have had minimum wage workforces have moved their wages beyond the minimum wage point, which of course has put some healthy upward pressure on everybody else. So I'm happy to see the progress made toward a more sustainable wage. These wages still aren't living wages. I don't want anybody to be confused to think that a $16.70 an hour wage is a living wage. If you made $20 an hour, you would make, what's that work out to? About a little over $40,000 a year, which means you could afford about $1,000 a month for rent. So let's not be confused that this is a living wage, but it's certainly better than where wages were prior to this action. Another state law change that's beginning on Saturday is ending the practice of allowing carryout liquor from bars and restaurants, something that I personally supported. During the pandemic, the state of Maryland tried to help restaurants and bars struggle because of the pandemic lockdowns and restrictions on visitors by greenlighting carryout cocktails. Maryland kept that law on the books, but this law sunsets on Friday, meaning you'll no longer be able to order margaritas, beer, or mixed drinks to go. I hope this practice would have been continued. That's why I advocated to continue it in the Assembly last session, but that's not the decision the Assembly made, and so this practice will end on the 1st. Finally, or almost finally, before we turn to our health team, I wanted to say Eid Mubarak to all our Muslim friends who are celebrating the holiday today. Montgomery County is one of the most diverse jurisdictions in this nation, if not the world. And we embrace this diversity, our socioeconomic, racial, ethnic, as well as religious diversity. And our Muslim community is an important part of our county's rich tapestry. We respect, honor, and are grateful to all the contributions they provide to this community. And have been active and been involved with many of the facilities that the Muslim community operates, from their health clinics to their operations that helped us provide food and testing and shots to people during the pandemic. And they have always been really leaders in helping us serve the broader community. And I hope that Eid brings peace, prosperity, and happiness to all of our Muslim residents, their families, and their communities. One last minute bit of bad news that I did not think was going to be in this week's update, but it's something that just happened. I want to acknowledge that I'm aware of at least 8 to 10 pride flags and other symbols in a Silver Spring neighborhood that were burned or desecrated last night. There's a horrible thing to awaken to in one's front yard. You ought to be able to put a pride flag up, or I support Ukraine flag up, or I support diversity sign up without having it vandalized. Sadly, these incidents are being investigated by the police now, and we stand in solidarity with families and the community. And hopefully there will be door cameras that maybe provide us a clue about who did this. It's also a reminder of why we have to remain vocal and firm against efforts to spread hate and intolerance in our community. If anyone community is made to feel unsafe and unwelcome, it's an affront to all communities. And I just think, people have got to be conscious that you cannot have exceptions to who you tolerate based on religion or sexual preference or race, any of those things. Because the moment you allow an exception, it's a slippery slope to letting somebody else say, I think I should have an exception for not tolerating some other group. This country's got a long, ugly history of intolerance, particularly in racial matters. It is not appropriate for us to say there are avenues that we think intolerance is okay. So I just want to be clear that, it's tolerance for everybody, not selective tolerance. And that's been the county's policy for a long time, and it's going to continue to be the county's policy. Finally, On our health report for this week, Montgomery County has been fortunate to continue seeing extremely low levels of COVID in our community and in our hospitals. A new variant, EU 1.1, is on the radar of our health experts, but it is from the same Omicron family that the bivalent boosters have been effective against. An FDA panel is pushing for updated boosters in the fall to target the XBB strain because it's most dominant right now. The XBB strain is the Omicron family and the same family of this new variant, just to be clear. So now I'd like to bring Sean O'Donnell on from our Department of Health and Human Services for his report before we take questions from the media. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. County Executive. To continue on, the CDC's updated our forecast for the variants, the strain that our county executive just mentioned, the EU 1.1, they estimate is around 3% of our cases now. Again, in context, our cases are much lower than they have been in the past, and at least much lower with significant illness. Very, very low levels of hospitalizations occurring with people with COVID. When we look across, this is true across the state, and as well as in the county. Obviously, these are PCR numbers that are being tracked and reported. And we know that after that very large Omicron spike, that a majority of people have now moved over to rapid testing, which isn't captured in these graphs. But you can see that even within that time period, we're at much lower levels of positive PCR cases. When we look at hospitalizations, which do not rely as much on which type of test you're doing, you can see that since that large Omicron spike with lots of hospitalizations, all of these cases, or the vast majority of these cases and hospitalizations, have been a result of other strains of Omicron. And you can see those levels have gone up during previous spikes, but over the last 2 months, we've seen extremely low levels of hospitalizations in our county. And the same is true across the state. We're only at 57 total beds across the state with a COVID patient. So good news on all of these fronts. Where it's a little more challenging is when we talk about people going out and getting their booster shots, and that's why we've emphasized this in these weekly meetings. While we say 95% of the county has received their first doses, that's only because the statistics are capped at 95% by the CDC. It's actually likely a little bit higher than that. But when it comes to the bivalent dose, it's only about 35% of our population in Montgomery County have gotten that bivalent dose. When you look across all the boosters, it's much higher. It's closer to 62%. But we see disparities in who's coming out for the bivalent doses. We see our African-American communities and our Latino communities, particularly those at younger ages, have not gotten their booster. So we strongly encourage people to do that. It works very well at helping to prevent hospitalizations, and we don't want to see those go up with disproportionate numbers amongst our populations in the county. We're looking for more information from the FDA and the CDC on the next booster, which will likely be out this fall, possibly September. And we'll work with our community partners again in making sure that vaccine is available to the community. At the end of this month, we're transitioning some of our vaccination clinics. We will continue to do COVID vaccinations at Dennis Avenue. You can go to our website and see which vaccines are being given on which days. We'll have both Pfizer and Moderna for all different age groups on different days of the week. So again, please check there if you're looking for a vaccination. Of course, if you have insurance, your healthcare providers are all providing these as well. And if you need testing, again, you can go to the county libraries to pick up free rapid tests. There's also the CDC website, which helps find no out-of-pocket cost testing for those who have been exposed or have symptoms. So, these resources are still available, and we encourage people to take advantage of them. Those are all the updates we have for you today, but happy to turn it over to my colleagues, either Dr. Bridgers or Dr. Davis, if they have any additional comments.
Thank you, Mr. O'Donnell. None for me this afternoon.
Thank you. Nothing else additional from me.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. O'Donnell. Members of the media, any other questions regarding the topics addressed by the county executive and or the public health update? Please raise your hand right here on the platform. We'll give you a couple of seconds. Any more questions today? No more questions? Going once? Going twice? I guess we're done for the day. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Stay safe. Have a great afternoon. We'll see you next time. Thank you, Mr. County Executive.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today.